It's sad that governments are chiefed by the double tongues. There is iron in your words of death for all Comanche to see, and so there is iron in your words of life. No signed paper can hold the iron. It must come from men. The words of Tenbears carries the same iron of life and death. It is good that warriors such as we meet in the struggle of life or death. It shall be life. In this classic scene of the 1976 Clint Eastwood film, The Outlaw Josey Wales, Comanche Chief Tenbears basically welcomes Wales into his part of the world like a refugee who now has something of a home. And for me, watching this film for the first time in quite some time, all of a sudden I realized, maybe you don't remember this film so well. And it seems the same case for reviewer Tim Neath, who writes, I had practically forgotten the plot, thinking it was about a Confederate who goes mad, shooting everyone in his path, blood spurting everywhere, bodies falling to the ground, shooting in glorious form. But after revisiting it, I now see a man who had to watch his entire family and home get murdered and burnt to the ground by Union soldiers. So he runs with a Confederate group to seek revenge. Eventually the group decides to surrender to the Union, except for Josey Wales, of course. As it turns out, the group's leader had been plotting with the Union about the surrender, and eventually, all the men in that group get gunned down, while unarmed, after surrendering. Once Josey Wales sees this, white America becomes something of an enemy to him. He has no place there. So he heads for Native America, which leads to that monumental scene with Chief Tenbears.
You'll be Tenbears?
I am Tenbears.
I'm Josey Wales.
I have heard. You're the Gray Rider. You would not make peace with the Bluecoats. You may go in peace.
I reckon not. Got nowhere to go.
And you will die.
I came here to die with you. Or live with you. Dying ain't so hard for men like you and me. It's living that's hard. When all you've ever cared about's been butchered or raped. Governments don't live together. People live together. From governments, you don't always get a fair word or a fair fight. Well, I've come here to give you either one. Or get either one from you. I came here like this so you'll know my word of death is true. And that my word of life is then true. The bear lives here, the wolf, the antelope, the Comanche, and so will we. Now we'll only hunt what we need to live on, same as the Comanche does. And every spring when the grass turns green, the Comanche moves north. You can rest here in peace, butcher some of our cattle, and jerk beef for the journey. The sign of the Comanche, that will be on our lodge. That's my word of life.
And your word of death?
It's here in my pistols, there in your rifles. I'm here for either one.
These things you say we will have. We already have.
That's true. I ain't promising you nothing extra. I'm just giving you life, and you're giving me life. And I'm saying that men can live together without butchering one another.
It's said that governments are chiefed by the double tongues. There is iron in your words of death for all Comanche to see. And so there is iron in your words of life. No signed paper can hold the iron. It must come from men. The words of Tenbears carries the same iron of life and death. It is good that warriors such as we meet in the struggle of life or death. It shall be life.
In addition to those classic Western themes of intensity, dramatic shootouts, and a thirst for justice, it's also very honest. As reviewer Dan Treadway writes, The film doesn't fall astern into old ways of doing things. The Indians are smart and largely peaceful, the women aren't shrinking violets, the Union soldiers are not heroic, and the Confederates are not scum. The barbarism of the West is mixed with a more liberal brand of acceptance, without seeming mealy-mouthed or unrealistic. And Tim Neath again writes, "What's special about this Western is that all the Native Americans are all played by natives, a fairer and more honest representation of the race that has been poorly depicted on screen since the dawn of cinema. They are not cliches or caricatures." One of the great things I found about rewatching this movie is the way it poses the questions about how we deal with our past while living in the present and shaping our future. It seems that Wales is almost justified in all the killings because of the horrible things that happened to him. Not in a general sense. I mean the idea of delivering consequences to the man who slaughtered his family. And there have to be consequences, I think, and that includes for Josey Wales. But as we go through this movie, I think we see him in that process of realizing all of this and trying to decide also how to deal with it. One thing that helps him along in that process, and it's also one of my favorite things about this movie, is his relationship with Lone Weight. Lone Weight is a super funny character, wise, has an interesting perspective on things, which I think Josey learns a lot from. So if you haven't seen this movie, obviously you need to watch. It's a classic. It's one of the greats. And if you haven't seen it in quite some time, I think it's a good idea to revisit it because I think it's better than you probably remember. And while there are a lot of great quotes in this movie, particularly from Lone Weight, I'm going to leave you with this one, which is really more of a general view of the situation at the time. It's actually not a great example of this idea of moving on and dealing with the past, perhaps, but it's an example of the understandable struggle of that time, which is indicative of the struggles experienced by the key characters in this movie and a running theme overall. I wore this frock coat in Washington before the war. We wore them because we belonged to the 5 civilized tribes. We dressed ourselves up like Abraham Lincoln. We only ever got to see the Secretary of the Interior, and he said, "Boy, you boys sure look civilized." He congratulated us and gave us medals for looking so civilized. We told him about how our land had been stolen and our people were dying. When we finished, he shook our hands and said, "Endeavor to persevere." They stood us in the line, they took our pictures, and the newspapers said, "Indians vow to endeavor to persevere." We thought about it for a long time, endeavor to persevere. And when we had thought about it long enough, we declared war on the Union.